Who didn't love SpongeBob as a kid? I know I sure did. Often watching his adventures and daily shenanigans with Patrick, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, Sandy, and a ton of other beloved characters on a day-to-day basis. My childhood went something like this. Go to school, come home, do schoolwork, watch SpongeBob, and other cartoons, rinse and repeat day in, day out. It was that way for years on end. During that time in my childhood, I also got the opportunity to play games on my PS2 a lot, and one of them was a SpongeBob game. That game in particular is SpongeBob's Creature of the Krusty Krab. 6 or 7-year-old me saw the cover in my local retro game store and gawked at how cool the cover looked. To me, it looked like an amazing game. I bought it, got home, and eagerly popped it into my PS2, awaiting what would come. And from what I remember, I was not disappointed and generally found it to be an amazing game, and possibly one of the greatest games of all time. However, I never actually finished the game fully, as the final section of it was just too hard for me to finish, and I was just left having never finished a childhood gem of mine. That is until now. I decided to replay through the game and finally beat it, to appease my younger self's desire that was never fulfilled. In the process of doing this, I figured why not turn into a video, and here we are. Is my child self right? Or will I take off the rose-tinted glasses and find out what's really true? Only one way to find out. Spoiler warning for what lies ahead. I will be discussing the game at full length, all of its story and elements. You have been warned. If you want to experience this game, and I recommend experiencing this game before you come and watch my video. Start off the story. It's pretty bizarre. It's very high concept, being split up into 9 different levels, all with different branching storylines that all eventually interconnect with one another by the end of the game. Level 1 sees SpongeBob racing in a dystopic and apocalyptic arena where everyone, including him, look grotesque and wild. It looks like something out of a Mad Max movie. SpongeBob and Patrick's faces haunted me a ton as a kid, and still do to an extent. Vibrating unknowingly drives into a sinkhole, and the level ends there. It then transitions to a Patrick themed level, being based on his persona as a superhero, Starfish Man. Starfish Man fights wrongdoers and protects the city. He fights his nemesis, dreaded Patrick, and foils his plans of littering the streets with propaganda, killing the mayor, and even sending an innocent citizen into space to die. He collects clothes for the mayor, helping him to be dressed and not embarrassed, and stumbled across dreaded Patrick's lair. He tells Patrick to come to his base, and he does. He fights wave after wave of goons, eventually saving the innocent tied up to the rocket. Ultimately, though, while the citizen is rescued, Patrick is knocked out and captured and is shot into space. Dreaded Patrick is thwarted, however, by a rock that acts as a rope around him that falls from space. The level ends, and it transitions into a plankton-based level. It sees him attempting to upskill himself, and he's partially successful, but it only brings him up to about how big SpongeBob and Patrick and other citizens of Bikini Bottom are. And unknowingly, he shoots a Krabby Patty morsel, and it becomes a supersized monster. It becomes sentient, and it chases down Plankton throughout a ton of different areas in Bikini Bottom. He tries to outrun the patty every time, and he does, and it eventually leads him back to the chum bucket, and he's hiding behind a rock, thinking he outsmarted the patty, only for the patty to see his antenna poking up behind the rock for him to be squashed, and the level ends from there. It ties back around to SpongeBob following level and sees him falling down in that sinkhole. He gets swallowed by the Alaskan bullworm, and he finds Old Man Jenkins, who tells him that there's a tribe living within the worm that can help him get out of the worm. He collects parts for a plane, eventually building one, and he and Jenkins escape the bullworm, or try to rather. It then wraps back around to Patrick, revealing that he is alive and he rides the rocket throughout space, eventually breaking free of the ropes he was tied to, and helps some aliens fight off threats, destroying a giant Krabby Patty shaped UFO in the process. Patrick heads back home to Earth and starts the crash. Meanwhile, Plankton wakes up and gets Karen to successfully upscale him, becoming a giant monster of sorts, even bigger than the Krabby Patty, making the Krabby Patty look like Plankton normally does, actually. Plankton rampages throughout Bikini Bottom, destroying several landmarks and various buildings in search of the Krabby Patty that fled away, being unsuccessful. Then, SpongeBob and Old Man Jenkins finally get out of the bullworm, flying into Bikini Bottom when Plankton is rampaging. SpongeBob realizes what's going on and tries to stop Plankton, leading him to the outer skirts of Bikini Bottom and ultimately shooting him down, though Plankton tricks him and captures him. Patrick, having been coming down to Earth, crashes down and conveniently comes in time of need. Plankton is coming back on top of everything. He and Plankton fight and meets with Mermaid Man, being told what to do. Patrick eventually defeats Plankton, shrinking him back down to normal size, and then the three are just suddenly transported. It was revealed that they were all dreaming, and that they had each eaten a Krabby Patty with something in it that linked their dreams together. And the bad guy was the Krabby Patty, the doctor who was talking to the three, and the one that had been there throughout all the dreams. They all then got transported to a racing track, racing against one another to get the Krabby Patty and get out of the dream. There's collectibles throughout the game, and completion of them allow you to play Patrick and Plankton in the race. And depending on which character you play, you get a different ending. However, there is a true ending that reveals Gary was the one who was dreaming the entire time, and he dreamed up everything. It also ends in a very dark way, as SpongeBob is swallowed by the Alaskan bullworm in his house. That was the story of the game. Very unusual and dark, even for SpongeBob. I generally really enjoyed the story and thought it was very unique and pretty out there for a SpongeBob game. It does have some pacing issues and it could have used more content, but what we got was still fantastic to me. Also liked how fanatical and nonsensical the game is, and taking a darker, horror-esque, sci-fi-esque stab at SpongeBob was really cool and worked out a lot. Moving on to the gameplay. Each section has its own unique gameplay, ranging from racing to platforming to shoot 'em up to quick time events. Diesel Dreaming is 50-50, being comprised of racing and platforming sections. Starfish Man to the Rescue is platforming. Supersized Patties, like a mobile running game before they existed, a la Subway Surfer and Temple Run. Rocket Rodeo is shoot 'em up. Revenge of the Giant Plankton Monster is destruction based. Rooftop Rumble is platforming, and Hypnotic Highway is racing. There are also 4 different mini games with different genres attached to each. The gameplay was more of a mixed bag, unfortunately, to me, as I did find some aspects of it to be way too easy and /or repetitive. Despite that, I still really like the gameplay and think the best parts of it make up for the not so good aspects of it. Moving on to a little bit of a miscellaneous section of variety of stuff: the graphics, voice acting, controls, glitches, etc. I know depending on which version people play, the game either plays incredibly smoothly or runs like complete and utter garbage. Luckily, I played the PS2 version, and I can say that the gameplay was smooth throughout. On the other hand, it was very buggy at times, and around the middle of the game I had to consistently restart my game due to bugs and glitches. However, given the history of the game's development and that there were errors in every version of the game, some better and some way worse than others, I'm grateful I was able to play through my copy entirely. Doesn't mean the glitches were fun to sit through though, not by any means. The controls worked great throughout and never failed. Very simple controls, and is perfect for the game. The voice acting features pretty much all the original cast, and as usual, they knock it out of the park with their voice acting, though especially for Plankton and Patrick. Tom Gandy does a good job of SpongeBob, but at some points it feels like he phones in his performance, whereas the others give it their all every time to me. Graphically, this isn't the best. It could look a lot better, but also it is not entirely horrible, as there's some aspects of it that look pretty good. Also, the context for the graphics partially looking like they do is in part because the models were largely reused and recycled from the previous SpongeBob games, the movie game, and of course the beloved Battle for Bikini Bottom. The art style, on the other hand, is absolutely incredible. They knocked it out of the park with the art styles present in the game, particularly in the loading cards in between levels, and especially the gorgeous cel shading and ultra stylized graphics you can find in Starfish Man to the Rescue. The soundtrack for this game is also bopping and banging, dude, and it has that classic SpongeBob sound to it. There's also a lot of post-game content that adds a lot of replayability to the game and gives reasons to come back to play again. So my verdict or final thoughts. The game is a 7 out of 10. It's super ambitious, great writing, and voice acting for the most part, but there's some missed potential in the level design, especially with the SpongeBob sections as they get too samey and repetitive at times. The plot could have used also more details and more context and content to fully flesh it out. Bugginess and glitching sometimes was annoying but wasn't too bad. The game holds your hand too much, even if it is meant to be a kid's game. Nostalgia also does play a big factor into why I like this as much as I do. It was a game that I played a ton as a kid and that I generally had a fun time with. Before I go, I figured I'd rank the levels in the game from worst to best. Here they are. Diesel Dreaming. It has better atmosphere and cooler stage design than Hypnotic Highway, but kind of lacks the cooler story beats and the actual sorta, air quotes, challenging gameplay of Hypnotic Highway, and the fact that you can play as Plankton and Patrick too. The platforming sections with SpongeBob are also kind of meh in this level, which also puts it down here this low, unfortunately. Writing is probably also at its worst here, partially because a lot of the voice actors are holding your hand, acting as a tutorial instead of giving funny quips and jokes like you expect SpongeBob characters to do, but the commentators shine through and save a lot of the level's writing, as well as the interactions between SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton. It's still not a bad section though. SpongeBob and Patrick's designs in this level will always haunt me. Hypnotic Highway is the second worst. The build up to this race story-wise is really cool. The fact that you can play as Plankton and Patrick in the final race by collecting all their collectibles and getting different endings with each character is also pretty cool. The stage design is also, while not quite as good as Diesel, still really cool with its psychedelic design and weird vibe. Plus the commentator's commentary and the banter between Plankton, Patrick, and SpongeBob is a nice touch too. Rocket Rodeo. A little bit bland at times, but still a fun shoot 'em up arcade type level. Patrick being in the vast reaches of space on a rocket, shooting asteroids down, and eventually a Krabby Patty UFO is wild and such a fun idea that was executed pretty well. I just wish that there is a little bit more nuance to the actual level and that there was more asteroids and such coming at you, but the writing is also pretty good here. This level's minigame is solid, but nothing special. Atmosphere is also really cool in this level. Rooftop Rumble. The multi-stage final boss fight / confrontation with Plankton before Hypnotic Highway is done pretty well, but gets a bit repetitive after a while. It is cool finally seeing all the diverging storylines of the game finally merging into one, and seeing Starfish Man with Mermaid Man was super cool, but the actual gameplay and boss fight with Plankton was kind of underwhelming, even though the actual way Plankton fights him is pretty smart and is a unique method. It's cool seeing Plankton's followers be enemies, and it is fun avoiding the lasers and smashing Plankton's hands in. It just gets a little repetitive, though I really like the final confrontation where you have to trick Plankton into shooting himself with a shrinking ray. The writing is also good, if a bit lacking at times. Alaska and Belly Trouble. The platforming here is much better than Diesel Dreaming. Take a gander as to why. They don't hold your hand every 0.5 seconds to remind you how to do things you most likely already know how to do. Better enemy designs in general, a lot of cool looking areas in the level, and some of the best writing in the game reside here. The tribal chief being married to an ironing board is hilarious, and the absurdity of it is absolutely sold. There's certainty in the voice actor's voice, and it's just made funnier with the outcome of what happens. The level is also low-key creepy at times. The interactions between SpongeBob and the other characters also really shine. It's hilarious. And just the general absurdity of SpongeBob being swallowed by the Alaskan bullworm and having to travel throughout its body, throughout various parts of it to build a plane, is also really funny and surreally bizarre. It just gets a little repetitive after a while, unfortunately. Still not bad by any means though. Also, this has the worst mini game of the bunch included the game. Nothing special. It came from Bikini Bottom. The writing is hilarious and is the best airborne / racing section of the game. The banter between Plankton, SpongeBob, Old Man Jenkins, and the news crew is perfect and hilarious. The atmosphere is also very great here, being very tense and actually kinda horrific at times. A giant Plankton constantly harassing you, trying to laser you down, knock you down with cars, boulders, etc., punch you out of existence, block you, is really unnerving conceptually and is really cool. The design is also really cool as it puts you on the edge of your seat, having to dodge a flurry of attacks from Plankton consistently. The pacing of these sections are also great, not lasting long and allowing the next section to shine as much as the previous. Also, the reference to King Kong at the end was amazing and done really well. Supersized Patty. Now, this is where it gets really tough ranking, as this section and the next two are borderline perfect. if not perfect. They nailed Plankton's first level down incredibly well. It's funny, it's got really good gameplay, it's simple, it's addicting, and it's highly replayable. It makes me smile, it lasts a perfect length, and it has some of the best mini games. Also, some of the best writing in the game, and some of the best references too. Also reminds me a ton of runner games as a precursor of sorts, like I mentioned earlier, especially Subway Surfer and Temple Run. Revenge the giant Plankton monster. Like I mentioned previously, this is really tough to rank. This could be number 1 one day, here another day, and 3 another day. But for now, I'm saying it's number 2. Playing as a giant plankton destroying Bikini Bottom is iconic and absolutely hilarious and a ton of fun. You get to destroy a lot of iconic locations in Bikini Bottom, including Mr. Krab's house, Squidward, SpongeBob, and Patrick's houses. You even get to destroy Sandy's tree dome. The writing is also excellent and it's super funny. The ticket scene is legitimately one of my favorite gaming cutscenes like ever. It's just perfect. The parody of kaiju monster movies is also done incredibly well here. The story advances naturally, and I actually kind of am rooting for Plankton to get revenge on the Patty, to be completely honest. The gameplay is also done pretty well, and it's pretty fun to play. This is it. This is what you've all been waiting for. Starfish Man to the rescue. It's utter perfection. Not a single criticism I can think of. Even if the game holds your hand a ton here, it's done so well in a comedic way. It was actually pretty funny, unlike Diesel Dreaming, where it's awkward tutorial dialogue with no substance or any nuance to it at all. Also a very engaging level story-wise, and is very imaginative and very unique looking compared to every other segment of the game, being cel-shaded and ultra stylized like a comic book. It also has the best enemy selection of any section in the game, as they have subtle nuances, and if you're not careful, you can easily be overwhelmed by them. The narrator also does an incredible job, and the villain is also super fun and also a great parody of 60s villains. Same with this level in general. Also hands down the most satisfying combat of any section and has the best writing of any section, being very hilarious and well written. So with that out of the way, I just want to say that I totally had no intentions of letting nostalgia blind me, and I did, to an extent. But there's nothing wrong with that. Nostalgia isn't always a bad thing. And also, not all of my nostalgia affected me, as I did legitimately enjoy the game a lot, almost a decade later for a little bit less. I loved revisiting this game and would love to come back to other games from my childhood in the future as well. Let me know what you think of the game, what your favorite SpongeBob game is, or what your favorite childhood game is or was. Leave your thoughts on the video or just say hi. I always read my comments and typically respond. I'm off to the stars. See you guys next time. Bye.